Go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's the one, the only V, the Guerrilla Economist, coming to you live, and it's another day, and you know what day it is. It's Hanging with Harley. So, welcome. This is a gentleman who needs no introduction. This is somebody who, folks, let's be honest here, he is the voice, the clarion voice of reason in this very confused, crazy geopolitical world. So, without further ado, Harley, how are you, sir?
I'm doing fine. You could say I'm doing better than the economy.
Well, according to the milk toast lightweights over at CNBS, the economy is doing wonderful, and there's no problems in this world, are they?
Well, V, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. My son is here. I don't know where my wife is. Can you hold on just a second?
Take your time. Take your time. No worries.
Yeah.
Sounds adorable.
Ah, all right. I'm sorry. Okay.
No worries, man. No worries. Don't worry about it. I'm in the same boat as you. I know exactly how that feels, and so does CJ. CJ's been through that route.
Did you see that South Korean broadcast where a guy's doing a live news feed and his little kid comes in and then his wife comes diving in after him? And,
That was the best. That was
wasn't
the
it?
best. And then the
Well,
feminists got upset after that.
I
Did
know.
you? It was ridiculous. They get triggered for everything these days, Harley.
All right. I think we're set now.
Okay. Where do you want to start? I mean,
Let's
whichever
start with
way you want to go.
because I think it's important
Yeah.
just to review the fact that there's a British operation with the neocons to destroy this administration, and it's not stopping.
Yeah.
We start with that, we can then put other things in perspective.
Okay. All right. So let's start with that. Let's start off with the continued attacks on the administration. Let's talk about the geopolitical mind games that are being played right now.
Yeah. Okay.
Harley.
Yeah.
Hello. Oh, I'm
Are you
sorry.
going to start?
Oh yeah, I
Okay.
was waiting on you.
All right, sorry.
No worries, brother.
All right. So, look, where do we start? You have the situation on the Korean Peninsula, which is extremely dangerous. You can't play games with it. You can't make threats to the North Koreans because you've got an instability factor there. You've also got threats being made against that they agree that Assad was responsible for the chemical weapons attack. So you've got a number of things that if Trump were able to step back and evaluate these things without the pressure of this ongoing neocon Hillary Clinton New York Times attack on him, he
Yeah.
probably could figure them out.
Right.
But it's sort of like when you fall into a chainsaw and you try and figure out which blade is nicking you. And it's the whole thing. They're trying to cut him off, trying to cut off his head.
Yeah.
And so what he's got to do is recognize that some of the people who are now parading as his friends are not his friends.
Even family members, I would say.
Absolutely. That they may not know enough to know what his best interests are, to be a little charitable. On the other hand, when it comes to Kushner, he's got some very questionable friends of his own.
Oh,
So
big time.
you're dealing with a situation where there's no time to move away from the pledges that he made that elected him president, which means starting with no regime change wars, no threats to the Russians or the Chinese. It means rapprochement. It means discussion. It means finding what the common interests of sovereign nations are and working together on those common interests, which Trump does recognize are much more important than some of the disagreements that we have. So he can't allow himself to be suckered into a confrontation with Russia or
Yeah.
China.
Right.
Now, the good news is the Russians are very calm. They're tough, but they're calm. And the Chinese are bending over to try and work with the administration, not just on Korea, but on a whole package of economic deals.
Sure.
For the moment, it looks as though the situation was improved with the Tillerson-Lavrov meeting and then Tillerson meeting with Putin. and then also the continuing conversations with President Xi of China. Now, the importance of these things are that the Chinese don't control North Korea because, to be quite straightforward, the North Koreans have built a hermit empire. They don't have much of a sense of what's going on in the rest of the world,
Hmm.
but that just makes them more paranoid. And when they hear things like destroyers moving onto their nearby, when they hear talk about preemptive nuclear strike, it convinces them they're right to have nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So instead, you've got to talk with them. And what LaRouche said is don't fall into the trap of thinking you can rattle a saber and cause Kim Jong un to quake and give up. He's not going to.
Yeah.
You have to talk
He'll
with
double
them.
down. He'll double down. This guy.
And look, they may not be able to reach us, but they can destroy South Korea and they can do an enormous amount of damage to Japan.
Yes.
So, for the sake of world peace, you have to simply say, look, let's talk with the Chinese, talk with the Russians, and let's see if we can come to some kind of agreement on this. Now, the Syrian situation, you really have to, I think Trump has handled it after the strike fairly well by saying we're not going to do it as long as you don't use chemical weapons. That's not an answer. You've got to find out who was responsible for the chemical weapons, if there was a chemical weapon release. And to do that, you've got to look at the people who are pushing the confrontation. And it's so striking to me, V, and I'm sure you've been following this. I know some of the people at Rogue Money are watching this closely. How much of all the noise about chemical weapons in North Korea and everything else is coming from the British?
All of it.
You know, Boris Johnson said that the British are prepared to join the United States to knock out Assad. Now, this is after he was rebuffed by the G7 last week. He's
Sure.
still going at it. The British are saying that the United States is prepared to launch missile strikes on North Korea. Well, Tillerson, Mattis, and others said, no, we're not prepared to do that. We'd rather not have to go to a military confrontation. So you can see the origins of much of these crises coming from the British and the British allies in this, the Saudis and the Israelis. And the Saudis and Israelis have a lot to gain by turning Trump against Iran. So Trump has to sit back with the people who advised him during the election and talked with him about his historic tendency to not want war, to not want to jump into these things, to not be a Hillary Clinton.
Right.
So if he can do that, then you can start addressing some of the other really serious problems, namely the fact that we still have a debt overhang that's uncontrollable, that's unsustainable.
Hmm.
We're still one bad derivative deal away from having a chain reaction collapse of the banking system.
Yep.
That's got to be addressed. And that's another area, by the way, where the British are in a flight forward. The Financial Times had 3 articles last week warning about the possibility that Trump will work with a bipartisan grouping to push through Glass-Steagall. And the Washington Post on cue jumped in bed with the Financial Times on this with exactly the same language. Glass-Steagall wouldn't have stopped the 2008 collapse, which is a lie.
That's a lie and a half.
Secondly, that you could never get Glass-Steagall because it would be too disruptive to the banking system. Well, we need to be disruptive to the banking system. The banking system has disrupted the world economy and the lives of millions of Americans.
Yeah, it's holding the whole
Why don't?
world hostage.
Yeah, yeah. So you deal with a strategic situation by reining in the neocons around Trump who are on a British policy orientation. Like this guy Rycroft, the British ambassador to the UN. He's the guy who drafted Blair's memo on the weapons of mass destruction that was involved in organizing us to go into the Iraq War in the first place.
Right.
So why are we listening to these people? Why is Tony Blair not in a orange jumpsuit for the crimes he's committed?
Exactly.
You know, I'm told he doesn't look so good in orange.
No, orange is not the new black for him. That's for sure.
Yeah. So, what you have is a situation where as long as these British intelligence types are able to pull strings in the United States, we're not out of the woods yet. Now, there's a very fascinating article in a German magazine called Focus about how Merkel, twice at the invitation of Cameron, went to the British summer home Chequers and had a meeting with the head of GCHQ, MI5, and MI6, in which they supposedly shared intelligence. Merkel on the German view of Putin and Ukraine, and the British on how to deal with the terrorism. Now, I find it humorous that the Brits wanted to hear from Merkel since they have her under surveillance and wiretap. They know exactly what she has. But what was interesting about the article is that the German intelligence community was shocked that Merkel talked to the Brits without talking to them. Now, this is how the world really works. You have the Five Eyes operation, the NSA with basically the Commonwealth countries, spying on the rest of the world and their own citizens. And when the NSA isn't spying on you, MI6 is, or the GCHQ is. So this has to stop. This is what Trump promised the American people, and the American people have to hold him to that promise.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. Harley, let me ask you this. Recently of late, it has come, and there's been a lot of chatter about this. There's a lot of talk about the whole Paris Accords. What do you think
Yeah.
is happening with that? Do you think, Trump is going to keep the U.S. in the Paris Accords? I mean, there's a lot of talk of him flip-flopping on it. People like Kushner, Tillerson want and of course Gary Cohn, freaking the guy,
Yeah.
the Goldman Sachs crony. They all want the Paris Accords, and they're trying to push him in that direction. Do you sense that? What is your gut instincts as well as some of your sources are saying?
Well, I wouldn't put Tillerson in with the Kushners or the Ivankas, if you want to call them that.
Yeah.
Um, but I don't think it's just Ivanka. I think you put the finger on it. Cohen, the liberal Democrats around Trump who are in lockstep with the neocons. Now, Trump made the point repeatedly that we're not going to go with this fake science.
Right.
That, in fact, Trump on some occasions identified that the people who are behind it are the same people who want to reduce world population. So he, on some level, gets it. But he's under enormous pressure on every single front. And they use the Syrian strike as a test case. Could they get him to do something that went against what he pledged to capture him? And there are reports. The Washington Post was reporting today that, or maybe it was the New York Times. I confuse them now that they're so much alike. But one of them said that Trump is considering keeping the U.S. in the Paris Climate Accord. This would be a catastrophe.
Yeah.
Again, his support base opposes that. They know it's a fraud. We've had global warming before. It's called summer. The so-called extremes have very little to do with anything man has done. There's
Correct.
no evidence to show that carbon dioxide has done anything but help the planet. If you
Yeah.
didn't have carbon dioxide, you wouldn't have green plants.
Exactly. Absolutely correct.
So this pseudoscience, and what I find interesting is there's going to be this Earth Day march of scientists for freedom of expression. These are the people, the so-called man-made climate change mafia, are the ones who shut out real scientists from the journals and from the conferences. The people at the National Weather Service, for example, who don't believe any of this man-made climate change stuff, are kept away from publishing in scientific journals. So the very people who are screaming about free speech are the ones who denied free speech to the opponents. They went so far as to call them deniers,
Hmm.
to compare them to people who denied that there was a Holocaust in World War II. So, I think if Trump submits to this, then we're in for a really tough 4 years, because it means he'll submit to anything. And this is again where, instead of being pessimistic or wringing your hands or crying in your beer, this is the time where real patriots have to put their foot down and say, we're not going to tolerate this. We put you in there to do a job, do it.
Right. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Um, it recently was said in the news that that Trump bluffed on the aircraft carrier, or he told the aircraft carrier to go in one direction, and then it went the opposite direction, and they're seeing that that's some sort of a foreign policy blunder on his part.
Yeah.
What are the media once again telegraphing all these moves wrong? Are they being played by Trump? Is Trump playing these guys for suckers and simps?
Well, I think Trump has to be very precise in what he says, because if he's not, the media will twist it.
Right.
Even when he is precise, they twist it. But what we're dealing with in the so-called media is the long-time practice of psychological warfare that was perfected during World War II by the British.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, in fact, what was behind George Orwell's 1984, where he wrote about how the people who can control the news will control the thinking of the population, including the character Winston Smith in 1984. What was his job? It was to go back to the old newspapers and change what was in it.
Yep.
So we're seeing psychological warfare in the form of disinformation and so on, that's being used to promote ideas that are worthless, have outlived their usefulness. There's almost nothing in the current paradigm that's worth saving.
Mm.
And that's on economic policy, strategic policy. So when you read one day, well, was Trump incompetent? Was it the military's fault? Most of the time, this is media spin. Now, the problem is that people inside the Beltway are very much influenced by that, especially the gutless cowards and corrupt, easily blackmailed people in the US Congress.
Sure.
They'll go along with the media.
Yeah.
Given that Trump has made his whole campaign was around attacking the lying media, let's hope that he's not submitting to this. But I think the story of the aircraft carrier, the Vincent, all these things, they're meaningless. What difference does it make if an aircraft carrier is 3 days away or stationed on the shore? We have capabilities that can hit North Korea without that aircraft carrier.
Yeah, 1000%.
Yeah, it's just to play the American people into a frenzy over when are we going to hit them, or are we going to hit them?
Yeah.
So I think, again, most of the psychological warfare is directed at the American people, but it is directed at Trump as well, and he's got to be very careful with this.
Right, he needs to, man. He absolutely needs to. What
That's why
else?
he can't listen to Kushner.
No, exactly.
Because
Is there anything
Kushner is
being done to
also,
get? Let me ask you a question, Harley, because you're close to the heart of this whole entire thing. Is there anything being done to get that kid out of the picture?
well, my personal view is that he's less important than is being made to seem, because by focusing on him, they force Trump to rally himself to defend him. I think it's much bigger than Kushner. In fact, I think he's probably a little player in this. Uh, Granted, Eric Trump said that it was Ivanka that convinced her father that he had to do something against Assad. But I
Yeah.
think the bigger picture here is that you've got people like Gary Cohn, who to me is probably a very significant player in this. Not entirely convinced that McMaster is a straight shooter. I think he's too close to Petraeus, who has his own bad ties, especially
Well,
to the
McNuggets has all sorts of issues.
yeah. And Mattis, he's still. We'll see what he represents. But then you have the whole secondary layer of institutional operations, which includes the old Obama crowd, the Hillary Clinton network at the State Department. These are still people who are making policy. So I think that's where you have the problem of the media shaping, working together with these stay behind networks. And the one thing that I've noted that was, to me, a cogent critique of what is going on with Bannon is from Roger Stone, who said Bannon did not move to fill enough positions with economic nationalists. And while some of them were fighting them off, fighting the neocons off with a stick, they still had enough clout to get in position, key positions in the administration.
Yeah.
Now, the other problem, V, just to be perfectly blunt on this, is you have a bunch of Republicans who are no damn good.
Correct.
Republicans in the House and Senate who are the neocon Bush crowd, the Wall Street crowd. And the best thing Trump could do to blow the whole thing up would be to get together with the 5 senators who now have introduced a Glass-Steagall resolution in the Senate, and people like Marcy Kaptur in the House, Walter Jones, a conservative Republican who's one of the signers of Glass-Steagall in the House, get together a bipartisan coalition and push through Glass-Steagall. Then you're going to see the real British networks freaking out, including in the Congress. And so I think that's an important litmus test. It's also important because the debt situation as a whole continues to be unsustainable and growing as a problem. We're not hearing about it because we're hearing about the hot spots, the French elections, the new election called in Britain. All these things to me are diversions. Underlying it is an extremely volatile debt crisis. They don't know what to do yet with the sovereign debt that's being held by central banks, for example. What effect that's going to have on interest rates. So, with these things in the background, Glass-Steagall is a must because it will shake up the whole thing.
Yeah, it is a must, and it needs to get pushed through. The concern is that you have so many neocons and banksters that are profligating not only the both House and Senate, but also the administration, like individuals like Gary Cohn, which is just disturbing to me on so many levels.
Cohn and Mnuchin did a little trick. They said, therefore, Glass-Steagall, but a modern Glass-Steagall, which doesn't go back to the old Glass-Steagall. Well, what are they talking about? Dodd-Frank?
Yeah, basically.
Dodd-Frank is, or ring fencing, the so-called British solution, which is called in Europe, they call it Glass-Steagall Light. It has nothing to do with Glass-Steagall. Glass-Steagall says there's an iron wall of separation.
Right.
Between commercial banks and investment banks, and that the gimmicks that investment banks have carried out to build up huge fortunes while screwing their customers would not be allowed, because when those deals collapse, it's the investment banks that take the losses. There'll be no bailouts, no bail-ins, no protection.
Yeah.
And I think that's crucial to bring about the industrial renaissance, the renaissance of the American system that Trump has been talking about.
Yeah. And, ring fencing in the UK really did, they put on a show of separating the retail banks from the investment banks, but that was it. It was just simply a show. The rehypothecation is still there. I mean, in fact, the rehypothecation in the UK is basically to infinity at this point.
You're absolutely right. The whole repo markets are bigger than ever.
Yep.
And what's underwriting it? The Bank of England, which is
correct.
The British government still owns, I think, 80-something% of the Royal Bank of Scotland.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. They still, I think, 84%.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's unreal. It's absolutely unreal. Harley,
So
we got about
you got to cut through these frauds, and that's what Trump could do. He's got to listen to people like Lyndon LaRouche, and he's got a few people around him who understand some of these things. I think at least in terms of the fight against the too big to fail banks, he could rely on Bannon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stone is still there. He's got some influence, thank God.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, Roger could always reach out to him and shake the cage a little bit. I mean, we're not out of the fight yet, and that's why this is a complicated thing. So people are saying, "Oh, V, Trump's a globalist, this and the other." If you notice, if you guys been listening, me and CJ have been very, very critical of some of the maneuvers that the administration has done. We think it's some of the things they've done is absolutely just short-sighted, to say the least. But we've yet to call the guy a globalist or he's part of the whole deal, this and the other. I know the guy's been given bad intel by bad people. or he's been given bad intel by people with good intentions.
Or the other thing to consider, V, is that this guy has been under attack, just
Yes.
ruthless attack from forward.
Yeah.
And the fact that he may make some bad judgments because of that should be considered as part of the picture. But you don't give him, because of the danger, you can't give him a free pass. On the other hand, you've got to recognize if you don't take out the enemies that he was fighting in the campaign, then he's left to do it alone, and one man can't do it.
Correct. Absolutely. One man can't do it. And look, well, two things are going to happen. By the end of 2017, going into 2018, either the swamp is drained or the swamp drains him. Either the multipolar world comes to fruition, and actually it is already in fruition. It's here, and either we're a part of it or we're not. Those are the two end notes. Either we end the end of this year, end of 2018, somewhere around this point, the next 2 years, the next 18 to 24 months, let's just put it out there. It's either going to be the beginning of something really incredible and awesome in American history, where we finally turn away from the siren song of empire, and we begin to start following our original destiny, to be an economic powerhouse, to be a productive country and a productive citizenry, and be the light on top of the hill. Or we end it in ruins and in shambles. And that's what we're facing. And I think we have the next 18 to 24 months to correct this ship. Otherwise, I fear for what's to come.
And I think when you took a look at a timetable of 18 to 24 months, it has to start now. The
Yes.
change is already there globally. There's a recognition growing that the Chinese economy is for real.
Yep.
The Chinese economic development is for real because of their infrastructure plans are physical production.
Correct.
Also, I don't know if you saw this, but even Christine Lagarde, the idiot prankster who runs the International Monetary Fund,
I love what
but she
you
had to admit the Russian economy is not doing too bad given all the
sanctions.
things that have been thrown at it.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. Harley?
So people can go to LaRouchePack.com and dig in. We've got a lot of material there. We've got a petition on the Glass-Steagall fight. People should be bombarding the Congress on it.
Yep.
I don't know how much longer the congressional recess goes on. When I hear the term congressional recess, I think of recess when I was in third grade,
Yep.
going out on the playground and beating people up. So the congressional recess to beat up some congressmen, figuratively, not literally. But
Yeah.
I think that's our job.
Yeah. I agree with you, and this is why people need to understand. Why do we keep pressing? Why does Harley and LaRouche Pack and over here at Rogue Money, we keep pressing Glass-Steagall, 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 Glass-Steagall? It's the only way to end the money from being in the hands of the bad guys. It's the only way to do it. It's the only way to hamstring them and bring this monstrous beast to heel. It's the only way to do it.
Absolutely right. V, in fact, I'm writing a piece for our German newspaper. I should finish it in an hour or two.
Yeah, send it over.
If any of your listeners would like to, I'll send it to you. I know you post some of these things on Rogue Money. I'd be happy
Yes,
to do that.
Anything you send to us, we post. If I don't get a chance to do it, James or CJ, anybody of these guys will pop it up there.
All right, I'll send it off to you.
Awesome. So with that being said, Harley, thank you so much for joining us, man. It's very informative, and it's always delightful to have you on. You're the voice of reason that always walks us back from the edge.
Well, I have to walk back from the edge myself once in a while.
Yeah, I hear you, man. I hear you. Thank you so much for being on, and thank you all for listening in. We'll be back same time, same channel next week for Hanging with Harley again. Keep it tuned right here, folks, because there's so many things happening. You need a clear understanding and a good balanced information, and that's exactly what Harley Schlanger provides. Thank you all for listening in. Take it away, CJ.